Welcome to Thinking Green. I am Rana, and I'm here today, virtually at least, with this year's Green Party candidates for Connecticut governor and lieutenant governor, which is actually, in my opinion, a much more important election with really significant issues than most people are giving it credit for or attention to. So I'm very happy to be joined today by Louise Bicking, who is running for governor, and Cassandra Martineau, who is running for lieutenant governor. And both of them might be familiar to many of you who live in the 2nd Congressional District, because each of them has been our congressional candidate in that district within the last 5 years. So welcome, Michelle, and welcome, Cass.
Thank you.
And I guess I'll just start out and ask each of you, in whichever order you want, like why you agreed to do this, and what in your experience makes you feel like this is a worthwhile endeavor that would be also a worthwhile thing for you to be spending your time doing.
Let me jump on in there. Greetings, everybody. So honored to be on Rona's experience yet again. Rona is someone I deeply admire, and I'm grateful to always have a conversation with her because I learned so much. I think that, one of the reasons why I decided to throw my heart and soul into this opportunity is to really show that our state should be represented by people who live here. Prior to engaging in this conversation, we had talked about how for time immemorial, the Democratic slate on the 2 highest offices in the state have always been folks of means who happen to identify as white. And, not to say that color is required, a certain color or a certain background is required to be able to run this state. I keep saying this country. Maybe the presidency is in my future. But to allow different points of view and to allow for other people who have a tremendous experience to offer to run is something that I would like to inspire other people to do. So it's not just the intention to run and serve, but to also let people know that there is power in diversity, and our state has so much to offer in that regard.
I wasn't entirely sure about it. Partly the reason I accepted the nomination is that I heard Louise Bicking was going to be the candidate for governor. I'd be honored to working with her in any time, any day. This is Cassandra Martineau. I've done a lot of local work in the town of Willimantic politically. I've done a lot of social justice work throughout my life, as well as environmental. As a trans woman, I do understand issues of marginality and dealing, with that. And, I've really spent enough time on the poor side of Connecticut. Connecticut is a very much bifurcated state. We're the richest state, but also the poorest state. And, as somebody who was teaching for a while and taught around a lot of districts, I got to see that very personally, the disparities between towns. And this is one of the big issues that really drives me. And living in Willimantic, which is one of the towns that is not as wealthy as some of the surrounding towns, I see that personally, and that's issues we struggle with. Connecticut has a lot of resources for some people, and I would like to see a lot of those resources more fairly and evenly distributed to those who need them more. And I think that's something that's really needed in the political discussion these days.
Agreed. Cass thank you, Cass, gave me permission to share a little bit more about where I'm coming from. As it stands, I'm a clinical social worker by trade as well as by passion. So I find myself working for those families who are, trying to figure out how to balance their expenses as well as put food on the table, as well as be present and available for other members of the family who may not be doing well, and looking outward and not finding the resources that they need to support them in that process. My work as a medical social worker, I'm often working with clients who are at end of life, and they are in that in-between stage where they have just enough money to have a nest egg, but not enough money to pay for services out of pocket. And unfortunately, we do not have a social support network for our eldest of the oldest of the old, nor do we have one for our children. So as Cass mentioned, we are indeed the richest and the poorest state in the union. We have a multitude of resources at our disposal that are not equitably being distributed amongst our residents. And it is high time to really look at that and look at the causes of disenfranchisement on a state level as well as on a local level. So thank you, Cass, for allowing me to share that.
And I just wanted to point out that, we sometimes get these very funny ideas about what qualifies people to run for these offices. And, if you look at our current governor and maybe some of the ones before that too, in Connecticut, at least, we're almost always looking at white men who are quite well off and either are attorneys or MBAs or business people. And I wonder what kind of effect it's had on how our state has been governed, that this is the kind of leadership that we seem to take for granted is what we need. Because, running government like business is exactly the kind of thing that has caused our state to be both the richest and the poorest. When we're thinking bottom line and only 1 or 2 quarters ahead, rather than looking at the human beings and what the needs are.
I mean, my training, formal training, has led me to consider the exact opposite. Like, how do you ensure that the greatest good is being attended to versus meeting those bottom line and feeding shareholders? I have my first master's is in public administration, an MPA, which is considered a soft MBA, where the focus is on enriching communities and being present for the needs of the people that you serve in many different ways. My second master's is in social work with an emphasis in gerontology. I've always been interested in working with our elders. I consider it a privilege as well as a ministry to be there for people at the end of life. So, my disposition is always focused on how can I shore up families to make sure that they are living the kind of life that they need to sustain their dreams and their hopes for the future. So it's always longitudinal. It's never just, what am I going to make in this quarter or the next few months? Like, what does your life look like? And how can we be available to you to make sure you get the best out of everything? So that means from making sure that your children have quality education, your young people have jobs that they can actually have a living wage and be able to take care of themselves and their families. When in retirement, you don't have to go destitute, to make sure that your basic needs are attended to. And then again, at end of life, to know that you have places that will be able to take care of you, and you don't have to constantly spend down your what you've saved so long for to see you through for the rest of your being here. So yeah, it definitely is a totally different mindset when you have that kind of background. And Cass, you were saying earlier about working with survivors of domestic violence, how that has actually influenced the way you see things.
What I'm doing now. And I mean, housing is atrocious, and trying to get them, we take people I run a domestic violence shelter,
Mhm.
and we take people and get them safe from their abusers. But it's a short-term solution. We're trying to get them into good housing and all that. And the housing prices around Connecticut are just, even in Northeast Connecticut, are just so
Mhm.
expensive. It makes it really difficult for people.
Mhm.
Also, as a trans woman, I mean, I've experienced, the poverty end and the marginalization end, and I worked with a lot of LGBTQ people. And,
Mhm.
I want to point out, Rana mentioned our Connecticut demographic of well-off white men running things, and there's nothing against these people. So many of them are perfectly nice people, but, if you're a well-off white person, white man especially, you're not seeing the issues of poverty and trying to struggle and get by in the state the way that a lot of other people are. It's just
Mhm.
not in your, in your viewpoint. Probably most of your friends are pretty well off, good CEO white men, and they're all doing fine too.
Exactly.
Um, and a lot of us are not doing fine in this state. And I think that's a perspective that's often very much lacking in government. And I think it would be incredibly valuable to bring that in.
Mhm.
Um, my experience in education as well, just having taught around different areas in the state, you can see those lines of poverty and wealth with such crystal clarity.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, it's really devastating. I mean, we were
very
talking
that
prior
exposure
to.
really drives my passion to try and make it better and try and help out.
Agreed. Sorry to interrupt you, Cass, but remember we were talking just now about the idea of room at the table. It's something that really speaks to me in terms of how we approach this campaign, as well as making sure that all voices are heard as much as possible. Um, there is, I do not subscribe to the myths of scarcity. I do not subscribe to the idea that there is not enough for essential services around the state. There's more than enough to be able to attend to everything. It just has to be managed more appropriately and more equitably. Um, and the idea of being able to bring different groups of people and organizations together to actually have a say in the way that they are governed just makes practical sense to me. Especially those who are the recipients of services that have been long denied. Those are the voices that need to be heard most of all. Uh, so yeah, it's a very exciting time to be
You
present.
know,
Well,
listening to both of you, I just recalled I worked for Head Start as a home visitor for
Mm,
12 years.
mhm,
And I was home visiting back in the 90s when Husky in Connecticut was expanding, which was a good thing.
mhm,
But one thing really pointed out to me, I think it was Cass's point about some of these privileged people in these positions just have no idea about what the other half's lives looked like.
right,
And when Husky was first expanded in Connecticut, they did not initially sign up any hospitals that were outside of Connecticut to be participants in the Husky program. And in Southeast Connecticut, and probably in other spots also, in the town of Pawcatuck, which is pretty much glued to Westerly, Rhode Island, uh, there were quite a few low income families in Head Start who suddenly couldn't get to the hospital of their choice because the Westerly Hospital was half a mile away and the New London Hospital was 25 miles away, and they didn't necessarily have transportation. So by the second year, the complaints had come in and that was corrected, but it was really illustrative to me that even people who are well-meaning can't always move beyond their experience and create policies that serve people whose needs might be very different from what they've experienced.
that's correct. That's correct.
it's people have blind spots, and if you haven't experienced anything, and I think this goes back to Michelle's theme of room at the table, Why have the table only been filled with people who are already in positions of comfort and power and privilege? And, even under the best intentions, if you've never had to really struggle with poverty, never had to struggle trying to get services for your kids, trying to get them through, you just don't have a clue. And they're not gonna, unless we have people who've had those experiences, worked with, some of the populations who are struggling with that, actually sitting, at the decision-making table. And I think that's a really essential voice to have. People who are doing okay shouldn't be the only ones running things, because they don't know how bad the systems that have worked very well for them have not worked for so many other people. Maybe to them, $15 an hour seems like a pretty generous minimum wage. To that single mother raising 3 kids in Hartford and sharing an apartment with like a friend and 2 other relatives, they're being stretched to their limits.
Right.
There's just no reason for it in my mind. Like Michelle said, there is no scarcity in here in Connecticut. It's just a matter of who's got what. It's a matter of distribution.
Truly
and
is.
equity.
It truly is. And I think for far too long that those who are at the table have been scattering crumbs onto the floors of these different nonprofit organizations that find themselves in highly disenfranchised neighborhoods and, for all intents and purposes, are making a profit in misery. I mean, that's their business. Even though they're present there to offer deliverables to that community, one of the only ways that they can actually make money is to offer those services in that area. But so it doesn't, to me, it doesn't speak to the idea of empowerment and industry on the part of the individual, just feeding the system that is broken from the start, and thinking that that money can be passed around to charitable efforts in order to actually address the core issues of different. I love that word, but I can never pronounce it. Disenfranchisement, poverty, limited access to quality education. Throwing money around in the sense of a charitable investment is not enough. I mean, you're not actually doing things that are going to make changes that are lasting. You're only appealing to the sensibilities of people who may look and sound like you at that table. So, no more crumbs. We all can eat.
Well put. I mean, just going from town to town, and I wrote when I was getting my master's over at Eastern. We're asked to write on at that point with the No Child Left Behind and high stakes testing, and center on a town and its statistics. And having lived at that point in Willimantic, and I was working in Mansfield, which is one town over, I decided to do twice the work and do what I call the tale of two cities, and do a comparison between Mansfield, who has plenty of resources, and their teachers are all paid a lot more. And, you can't really see the income levels, but you can see like how many kids in a school are getting free lunches. So that's an indication of, poverty versus not poverty, and just matching up those numbers and those economic numbers with like the results of the high stakes testing going on in schools. And at that time, and I think it's still largely the truth, the people who do better on the tests get more money. So it's like, okay, people who have the resources already are going to get more. While what does Willimantic get? A special master who's going to go in there and get rid of recess and get rid of bilingual, teaching, because heaven forfend, in a town that's 50% Hispanic, we have bilingual teaching. Gosh, no excuses, and it creates, pockets of poverty that are going to be generational and continue on in that town. Because okay, so Willimantic doesn't have the money, we don't have the income tax base to pay our teachers as much. We've got a lot more poverty, so we've got kids going to school hungry, and everything just doubles up on itself and continues to, entrench the people who have plenty getting more and those who have little getting less and less.
Right.
It's like the systems are almost designed, to just keep things the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like you said, Michelle, just put a veneer on with those little crumbs that they toss out for those poor people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, without recognizing, the serious limitations that are put.
It also speaks to the idea of assuming that poverty is personal and not systematic. And that if you find yourself in a situation where you are lacking, that you're unable to afford to put a roof over your head or food on your own table, that it is your fault. And that doesn't give any or shed any light on the institutional biases that have been in place for millennia in this country, not only in this state. We should be mutually accountable to each other. We share the same air, we share the same space, and we should also share the responsibilities of ensuring that everyone that live here has the best quality of life they can possibly have. I love the discussion around having a livable wage versus a minimum wage, because you're absolutely right, Cass. Some people get stuck on the idea of $15 seeming a lot of money, knowing that in countries outside of the world, that person may not even make $15 a month, never mind $15 an hour. However, when you look at, like Cass was saying, if your rent is $1,200 and above, and you may have to split it with several members of your family just in order to have some place to call home, then that's not a livable wage. That is not something that can actually sustain you. And then what about your savings? How can you save for your rainy day if it's constantly raining? How do you actually make a difference in terms of what you want to do for the rest of your life, in your golden years, if you're constantly trying to keep up with the bills that are coming in right now? So it's quite devastating, but I'm incredibly hopeful that, once people get a sense of the purposeness behind this campaign, that once they get a sense of our commitment to our fellow human beings. I also identify as a member of the LGBT community as pansexual, and I recognize that there is indeed bias in that. I do recognize also that as a Black woman, that I'm often considered the mule of the world, that we are assumed to be so strong and so defiant and so loud, but that often takes away from our dignity as just wanting to be human and wanting to love and to be loved by others. So, I'm very excited for the prospects that lay in front of us, Cass and Rona, and I'm looking forward to being able to get out there and get to know and be known by people and know that they deserve to be cared for.
And I feel partly the elephant in the room is just capitalism itself.
Yes.
We saw, I don't remember who this was, Jeff Bezos or one of those multi-billionaire kind of guys saying, well, we don't have enough poverty, people aren't going to want to work. And it just put the whole lie to that the whole system of capitalism requires a poverty class. It requires, people being treated really poorly at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And, the fact that he spoke, the only thing remarkable about that is that, one of our US oligarchs actually spoke that out loud.
Out loud, yes. He said the quiet part out loud.
And it's a system inherently based on inequity.
Mm-hmm.
To try and promote it is inherently good, and anything that's opposed to it is inherently evil. Is just, I don't know. It feels like propaganda to me, and this is one of the issues holding us down. It's like this is the one thing we cannot question. Is the systems that we have that were created at the beginning of the country, created hand in hand with racism and with sexism, and so many hierarchies of birth, never mind the economic hierarchies, which we have this fallacy of social mobility within the United States, and it's a big lie. Yes, some people move around in their economic class, but most of us stay about where our parents were.
Right.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. And I was just, you were talking about how people are, oh, it's always raining, and then people never get to have that nest egg to save for their old age. And, I have to think about that in terms of statistics and how, Black men and Black women are dying at, 10 years younger than white men and white women. And, we see similar things along poverty lines and other areas of marginalization. And I can't help but wonder, that this is not only quality of life, but it's quantity of life as well.
Quality of life,
How
that's right.
how long people are living. And you know what? Somebody's living longer, they're able to work longer. That means they can save more and pass on. And that starts getting into the questions of intergenerational wealth. That's great. People want to do well for their children, but why do we have a society constructed where some are able to do that and some are just barely even able to survive? And even that's a challenge.
That's right.
And we do a great job in Connecticut. We got all the poor people in Willimantic and the well-off people in Mansfield, and same with a million other towns throughout Connecticut. So all those nice rich people don't have to see any of us poor scrabbling people, and don't have to see the homelessness. And
And it shouldn't have to be that way. I think one thing that has been core, though, when facing systems is the idea of revolutionary acts of groups of people. That seems to be something that has never been able to be squashed out completely from even for, in terms of my history, collective world history, coming from those people who were enslaved on the boats, deciding that they were going to jump off the boat and drown rather be brought in change into a world that they've never been. Burning down plantations and teaching each other how to read by candlelight. I mean, that whole spirit of knowing that you deserve better, knowing that, humanity is something to be shared and not hoarded in terms of what, is out there and available in abundance for all people. I think that spirit also runs deep within our history as a country as well as a state. So I believe in the resilience of Connecticut residents. I think that we are actually the cure to the ills of social inequity and the deep reaches of capitalism and heteropatriarchy. I think that within our hands is the future, not in the hands of the 1% or the 0.5% who hoard the wealth in the state. So that's what I'm looking forward to really delving into in the months to come.
And it just strikes me the different outlook. The people who are really well off get there by dominating over others. And the people who aren't survive more by mutual aid. And I think that kind of tips to the ideas that you were talking to. And, you still see that happening, households helping each other, poor people just, okay, yeah, you need a couch to crash on, and, come here, I'll set you up, helping each other out in small ways. But, I think it's that mutual aid and that coming together in community, which is really going to be, the greatest strength that those of us who don't have so much power are going to have.
Right. Agreed.
Now in New London, we're seeing increased interest and acknowledgement that the land that we're sitting on, was pretty much stolen from the people who sat on the land, before us. And I keep, it happened, historically, if you go to our food co-op, even on their website, they, have an acknowledgement that where the store was tribal lands. And of course, urban renewal in the 60s destroyed neighborhoods where there was a lot of Black ownership of houses in New London. So it happened, really historically, and then, not that long ago. But I'm wondering, so where do we go from here? I don't feel as though it's enough to just say, oh yeah, we stole that land and we're acknowledging it, but we don't know how to go about like rebalancing things, and creating justice and figuring out some way to do reparations and give back from what we stole. So do you have any thoughts on like how we can move forward to like, I don't know, straighten things out?
Um, I'll share a little bit. I mean, I'm thinking in terms of remembering that First Nations people have not disappeared. They're still very much here with cultures that are vibrant and alive. And we have still in existence several bands and nations and communities in state that could serve as a in a consulting basis on what would be appropriate in terms of recognizing their presence, as well as the presence of the many groups of people before them. I think acknowledgement is a good way to start, to remind people that yes, this is stolen land from which stolen labor was used to found all of the institutions and upon which this country is built, never mind the state. And we recognize the importance of that awareness. And we need education versus propaganda to have an understanding of where we need to go moving forward. So I think broadening the conversation to include those in which we're seeking to represent would be a healthy transition. And perhaps, the Pequot would be just for one group of First Nations people would be willing to have that conversation. Because I remember briefly when I was working on one of the panels related to social inequities in state, I noticed right off that there was no representation of First Nations people. They had talked about doing so, but it never evolved or beyond a conversation. So perhaps this is more than an opportune time to engage folk who might be interested in to actually do things to make it so that it's not just an conversation that falls on deaf ears.
I think that's a wonderful idea. I would like to see some of our priorities and spending priorities move away from like subsidizing big corporations and back towards common areas. We had a big discussion in Willimantic. This is one thing that I was part of and was proud to have had an influence in my own small way. And the library had this community room. And everyone, the people in town council were talking about, charging fees for it. And I'm here, this is, we need to make spaces that are publicly available for those who don't have that money. And I made an argument, we don't have the money. And it's like, just after he talked about like, $3 million to move, temporarily move offices from the middle school to one other building while it was in there. And it's like, you can't have a little bit of public space. Let's bring back that idea of public space and bring back funding to those areas, that are common space and that don't require income to participate in. Because those are a lot more open and, more space kept for open space. And let's start having a little bit more respect for the land that we do live on, instead of just looking at it as a commodity to, get the best, tax dollar off of, or, retail dollar. But, where can that money go to quality of life, and how can we bring these resources to the greatest amount of people possible?
That's right.
I love that you brought up the library, because a few months ago, I did a Zoom interview with a couple of people from our New London Library, which is not well funded. But one of the points that they brought out is that libraries are kind of the last bastion of places where people can enter with no expectation that they'll spend money. So pretty much everything in our life has been commodified. And I'm old enough that, I grew up in as a kid in a capitalistic society, but things were not commodified to the point that they are now. Now it seems as though everything is about the bottom line. Healthcare and housing, they're all, ways for people to make money rather than things that help us through our everyday lives.
When I used to work in not to interrupt you, Cass, when I used to work in Willie as a clinician, one of the things I call Willimantic Willie, one of the things I noticed was the scarcity of trees and open spaces. So, it's almost if it's done on purpose, where, certain neighborhoods are incredibly green. There are parks and walking, areas to take hikes and just be outside, because that's where I spent a lot of my childhood as well. I'm old enough to remember when being outside was just enough. And you found things to do. You played games, you ran up and down the street. I grew up in East New York, Brooklyn, so you made joy where you can find it. But when you go to more impoverished neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are not getting nearly as much support as others, it's all cement blocks. There's very little trees. They're very, buildings are close together, and there's often no open space just to come out and spend, some time with your neighbor. So there's a lot to be said in terms of making communities more livable and communal, so we can actually see each other and spend some quality time with each other, and not just, hide away in our respective homes behind TV or, or even smaller screens. Get our children outside, our elders outside, and engaging with each other. That's how you establish some form of meaningful connection with your fellow human being. At least one big way of doing so.
I just want to point out, first of all, that everyone in town council grumbled and cursed about me when I brought that up, but they ended up going my way, and we do have a fee-free library for that room, and it's been used for a lot of, our library is used for a lot of great
Yes.
things. But yeah, talking about the green spaces as well, and it's a place to go. I grew up with my childhood catching frogs and toads in the swamp nearby where we lived, and it was just a great way to always connect.
Yes.
But it makes me wonder about things like air quality and other quality of life issues that come along with that, or with that lack of trees and that lack of green spaces, as well. A lot of Connecticut's got some really bad air quality, and partly that's because of that, that use. Partly, we just downwind from Ohio, and we're catching a lot from the rest of the country. We can't do about that, but
did we lose you?
You're muted. Oh, I don't know if we lost her or not, but
what a great
hopefully
point to add. What a great point to end up with.
Yeah, my pet peeve has been often in New London, the poorer neighborhoods, the natural features like the streams are fenced off and people can't get to them. It's almost like if someone drowned once in a stream, then no one else can have access. So it's kind of almost infantilizing poor people, that they can't really keep themselves safe. So they have to be fenced off. Well, we might have lost Cassandra. Hopefully she'll come back, but we only really do have like 10 minutes left. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the whole process that the Green Party has to go through to run candidates, because it isn't easy the way it is for the major parties. And part of it is that our politics is kind of commodified. And so you have to prove yourself if you're not chasing dollars. So right now, and I'm going to share my screen, we are in the process of earning the right to have our candidates run for office. So if you look at this petition, we are circulating it all through the state. You'll probably start seeing us at various outdoor events that are going to be happening now that the weather's warming up. And the top two names on the petition are Michelle's and Cassandra's. The people lower down on the petition may or may not be our ultimate candidates. We had to put people's names on back in January, and some of the people on the lower part of the ticket are qualified, but have had personal things come up in their lives that they're not sure they want to run. But if you see one of these petitions, I want to entreat people to sign it. It is not an obligation to vote green, although we certainly hope you do. I feel as though our candidates do provide a real choice, not just a, two sides of the same coin kind of choice, but it's also about political access. And we hear from the Democrats quite a bit talking about how important it is that voters can get to the polls, they can get registered, and they really believe it in democracy. One thing that Democrats in Connecticut and nationwide both have failed at is having a similar commitment to giving all those people who have access to the polls, access to choices in who they can vote for.
They haven't failed. They've deliberately, purposely excluded us. And they constantly change rules to make it harder for third parties.
That's right.
The fact is, the Democrats and the Republicans have a lot more in common than either one is talking about, even as both parties fearmonger for the other party. And, oh, you've got to vote for us. It's the most important election of your life, which I've been hearing from the Democratic for the last 30 years, 40 years. You know what? They use fear mongering because it works. And I got to be honest, if we're ever going to have any change, it's going to take courage. It is going to take courage, and it's going to take, the possibility that those mediocre, okay ones might not win, to cross over and vote green. But if we're ever going to have any change, then, even if we don't get it by getting green candidates elected into office, which I would love to see. I think if we start making a credible threat to the major parties by talking about issues of income inequality and, injustice, and bringing that up, and quality of life issues that they're missing on, then, if nothing else, they're going to be forced to take these issues a little bit more seriously and start listening. And that's an important part of the process as well.
That's historically been shown during the New Deal times. The Socialist Party in the United States was quite strong and put a lot of pressure on the Roosevelt administration to put some of these things into practice. And we saw in the other direction, in spite of it being the Democrats, in my experience, more than the Republicans, who complain about minor parties being spoilers, the one presidential election that might have really had a third party candidate impact the result was when Bill Clinton beat
Ross Perot,
Herbert Walker Bush, because Ross Perot got about 15% of the vote. And a case could be made that he was likely to have taken more votes from the Republican side than from the Democratic side. So to me, it's highly ironic that the one perhaps real spoiler helped the Democrats. But what happened afterwards is that Clinton's policies were extremely conservative, and I think part of that was because
his three main achievements were Republican.
It was the influence of Perot.
Social services, give more power to the police. And
I think he was the one who got rid of Glass-Steagall, some of the protections against the over-commodification and consolidation of economic power. So yeah, and I'm pretty convinced that, though I don't think he was a radical guy in of himself, that the fact that Perot struck such a chord influenced policy for years to come. So, you know, as a minor party, I would love us to influence policy, you know, make it, I don't know, if a governor of any party wanted to make our income tax system more progressive and less regressive, I want to have their back. If they're willing to put in, you know, a pilot for a single payer universal healthcare system in Connecticut, Husky for everyone, then I'd like to have their back. And, you know, I'd like them to be Greens, but if they're going to do that stuff, I would support that effort.
It is definitely something to be said about the Green Party, is that we are a party of issues, not just stances. I mean, we actually believe in solving what ails us as a state. So I hope that people, when they go out to the ballot, they make decisions based on the merit of this, and that we offer a healthy alternative to what is the status quo, because the status quo does help both Republicans and Democrats. They benefit from it, and it's an addiction that can be attended to, and we are the cure. The people are the cure.
Well, I know this is going to air next Tuesday, so the times are really skewed, but we're out of time. It's 5:13 and a half right now on Thursday afternoon, and we have a meeting at 5:15. But we will continue to have candidate interviews off and on. Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Cassandra. And, you know, all of you who are out here, to the greatest extent that you want to engage with us, we'll be putting out information. I'll put a splash screen after this with contact info so you can find out more. So thanks very much, and we will see you next week.